My daughter's teacher asked, "Why does your child remember events from a town that was erased from all maps in 1952? Ms. Carlisle was holding a sketch when she called me into her classroom after school. My 6-year-old daughter, Maya, was sitting at a desk coloring, humming to herself, completely unaware that her teacher's hands were shaking. The drawing showed a town square with a distinctive clock tower, storefronts with hand-lettered signs, and people in old-fashioned clothing. The detail was remarkable for a first grader, but what made my stomach drop was the label at the bottom in Maya's careful handwriting. Ridgeway, where Grandma lived when she was little. Ms. Carlisle, who'd taught elementary school for 19 years and had a master's degree in early childhood development, set the drawing on her desk and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Fear, maybe, or confusion. "Mr. Sterling, I need to ask you something, and I need you to take this seriously. Has Maya been exposed to historical documents about Ridgeway? Old photographs, archives, documentaries?" I shook my head, not understanding. "I don't even know what Ridgeway is. Is it near here?" She pulled out her laptop and showed me a Google Maps search. Nothing. Then a Wikipedia search. No results. "Ridgeway was a town in western Pennsylvania," she said quietly. "Population roughly 3,000. It was evacuated and demolished in 1952 as part of a federal land acquisition program. The government claimed eminent domain, paid residents a fraction of what their properties were worth, and bulldozed everything within 6 months. Then they erased it from official records. No maps, no census data, no acknowledgement that it ever existed. I only know about it because I wrote my graduate thesis on displaced Appalachian communities." I looked at Maya, who was still coloring, adding details to a drawing of what looked like a small church. "That's impossible. Maya's never been to Pennsylvania. We've lived in Ohio her whole life. My mother's from Cleveland, my dad's from Akron. There's no connection to this Ridgeway place." Ms. Carlisle opened a folder containing more of Maya's drawings, at least a dozen of them, all depicting the same town from different angles. A main street with specific businesses, Murphy's General Store, Ridgeway Pharmacy, the Copper Kettle Diner. A residential street with houses that had detailed architectural features, wraparound porches, and specific paint colors. A school building with Ridgeway Elementary, established 1887, carved above the entrance. Each drawing included people, and Maya had labeled some of them with names. Mrs. Kowalski, the librarian, Mr. Dawson, who ran the post office, Tommy Chen, who delivered newspapers. The level of detail was impossible for a child who'd never seen these places or people. "She's been drawing these for 3 weeks, Ms. Carlisle said. "At first, I thought it was just imagination, a fantasy town she'd created. But then I noticed the consistency. Same buildings, same street layout, same people. So I did some research." She pulled out a manila envelope and removed several photocopied pages from what looked like an old book. The images showed photographs from the 1940s, grainy black and white shots of a small town. And they matched Maya's drawings exactly. Same clock tower, same storefronts, same church. "This is from a privately published local history book that was printed in 1951, 1 year before Ridgeway was erased," Ms. Carlisle explained. "There are maybe 5 copies in existence, held in private collections and university archives. I had to request special access to get these photocopies. Your daughter has somehow recreated this town with perfect accuracy, despite having no possible way to access these source materials." I sat down heavily in one of the tiny first-grade chairs, my knees nearly touching my chest. "There has to be an explanation. Maybe she saw something online, or maybe someone showed her pictures." "Ms." Carlisle shook her head. "There's almost nothing online about Ridgeway. The government's erasure was thorough. And Mr. Sterling, it's not just the drawings. She talks about it. She tells stories about living there, about walking to school, about the summer the creek flooded and destroyed the bridge. She describes the smell of bread baking at Thompson's Bakery and the sound the clock tower made when it chimed. These aren't things you get from photographs." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Has Maya ever mentioned having memories that don't belong to her? Has she talked about people or places you don't recognize?" I thought about the past few months. Maya had always been imaginative, telling elaborate stories and creating detailed fantasy worlds during playtime. But now that Ms. Carlisle mentioned it, there had been odd moments. Maya insisting that strawberry ice cream tasted wrong because it's supposed to have real strawberries like Mr. Murphy made. Maya crying when we drove past a construction site because they're tearing down the houses again. Maya asking why we didn't go to church anymore, like we used to every Sunday. I'd dismissed these as normal childhood randomness, but now they felt different. "I need to talk to my mother," I said quietly. "My wife died 3 years ago. My mother helps take care of Maya while I work. If anyone would know about a connection to this town, it would be her." Ms. Carlisle handed me the folder of drawings. "Mr. Sterling, I'm telling you this because I'm concerned, not to frighten you. But Maya's knowledge of Ridgeway goes beyond what's explainable by normal means. Either someone has been teaching her about this place deliberately, or something else is happening, something I can't explain." I picked up Maya, who chatted cheerfully about her day as we drove home, mentioning her friends and the story they'd read about dinosaurs. Normal 6-year-old conversation. But when we pulled into the driveway, She looked at our house, a standard suburban ranch built in the 1990s, and said something that made my blood run cold. This house doesn't have a porch like our real house did. I miss sitting on the porch with Grandma Pearl and watching people walk by. My mother's name was Dorothy. She'd never gone by Pearl. I'd never heard that name in my family. That evening, after putting Maya to bed, I spread the drawings across the dining room table and called my mother. Mom, I need to ask you something strange. Did we have any family in Pennsylvania? Specifically, a town called Ridgeway? The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. Mom? Her voice, when she finally spoke, was barely a whisper. Where did you hear that name? I explained about the drawings, about Ms. Carlyle's research, about Maya's impossible knowledge. My mother was quiet again, and I could hear her breathing, quick and shallow. I need to come over. Don't show those drawings to anyone else. Don't talk to anyone else about this. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She hung up before I could respond. My mother arrived in 15 minutes, her face pale and drawn. She was 73 but had always been energetic and sharp. Tonight she looked every year of her age. She walked past me without a word, went straight to the dining room table and stared at Maya's drawings. Her hand went to her mouth, and she made a sound like she'd been punched in the stomach. Mom, what's going on? She picked up the drawing of the main street, her finger tracing the outline of the clock tower. This is exactly right. The clock had a crack in the face from when lightning struck it in 1949. Maya drew the crack. She pointed to a tiny detail I'd missed, a small, irregular line across the clock face. And this building, Murphy's General Store, it had blue shutters that Mr. Murphy painted himself. The color was wrong, too bright, and everyone joked about it. Maya got the color exactly right. I sat down across from her. Mom, you need to tell me what's happening. How does Maya know about this place? My mother set down the drawing and looked at me with tears in her eyes. Because I'm from Ridgeway. I was born there in 1951. My mother was Pearl Whitmore, and we lived in a house on Maple Street with a wraparound porch. I was only 14 months old when they evacuated the town, so I shouldn't remember any of it. But I do. I have memories that I shouldn't have, memories of a place I was too young to remember consciously, and apparently, I've passed those memories on to my granddaughter. The room felt like it was tilting. That's impossible. Memories don't transfer between generations. My mother laughed bitterly. Tell that to Maya. Tell that to me. I've spent my entire life trying to forget Ridgeway, trying to convince myself that my memories were just stories my mother told me. But they're too detailed, too real. I remember the smell of the bakery, the sound of the clock tower, the faces of people I was too young to have known. And now Maya has the same memories, even though I never told her about Ridgeway. I never told anyone. She pulled out one of the drawings showing residential houses. This one, the yellow house with the green trim, that was the Kowalski family. Mrs. Kowalski was the librarian. She used to give children cookies on Saturday mornings when they came to return books. I remember the taste of those cookies, oatmeal with raisins. But I was 14 months old when we left. There's no way I should remember that. I tried to process this. What happened to Ridgeway? Why was it erased? My mother's expression hardened. The official story was eminent domain for a flood control project. They said they needed the land to build a dam and reservoir. Families were given 30 days to evacuate, paid pennies for their homes and businesses. The government brought in bulldozers and demolished everything, every building, every street, every memory. Then they planted trees and let nature reclaim it. Within a decade, you couldn't tell a town had ever existed there. She paused, her voice dropping. But there was no dam, no reservoir. They lied about why they wanted the land. My mother spent the rest of her life trying to find out the truth, writing letters to congressmen, filing Freedom of Information Act requests, contacting historians. She died in 1998 without ever getting answers. All she knew was that something had happened in Ridgeway, something the government wanted buried along with the town. I thought about Ms. Carlyle's words, about how thoroughly Ridgeway had been erased from official records. What could have been important enough to justify destroying an entire town and erasing it from history? My mother shook her head. I don't know. But whatever it was, they didn't want anyone talking about it. After the evacuation, families were scattered across different states. There was no relocation assistance, no community preservation. It was deliberate fragmentation, making sure the people of Ridgeway could never organize, never share their stories, never demand answers. Over the next week, I became obsessed with understanding what was happening to Maya. I took time off from my job as an accountant and dove into research. I found almost nothing about Ridgeway online, just a few obscure references in academic papers about Appalachian displacement and one brief mention in a book about Cold War-era government land acquisitions. But I did find something interesting, a pattern. Between 1950 and 1955, at least 17 small towns across the United States had been evacuated and erased under similar circumstances. All were in rural areas, all had populations under 5,000, and all were removed from official maps and records. The government's stated reasons varied: flood control, military testing ranges, environmental contamination. But none of the promised projects were ever completed. The land was simply cleared and abandoned. I contacted Dr. Raymond Liu, a historian at Penn State who'd written about displaced communities. He was intrigued by my questions and agreed to meet. His office was cluttered with books and maps, and he had the intense focus of someone who'd spent decades chasing a story no one else cared about. Ridgeway, he said when I mentioned the town. That's one of the more mysterious erasures. The official documentation is minimal, and what exists is heavily redacted. I've been trying to access the full files through FOIA requests for 8 years. The government claims national security exemptions. He showed me a map of western Pennsylvania, with a small circle drawn in red marker. This is where Ridgeway was, roughly 40 miles from Pittsburgh. The area is now state forest, officially undeveloped, but satellite imagery shows some interesting anomalies. He pulled up Google Earth on his computer and zoomed in on the location. The terrain was heavily forested, but if you looked closely, you could see geometric patterns in the tree coverage, suggestions of a street grid beneath the vegetation. Something's buried there, Doctor, Liu said. Not just demolished buildings, but something the government wanted hidden. I have a theory, but it's controversial, and I can't prove it. He pulled out a file containing declassified documents from the 1950s. During the early Cold War, the government conducted numerous secret programs: radiation experiments, chemical weapons testing, psychological warfare research. Most of these programs have been partially declassified and acknowledged. But there are gaps, programs that we know existed but have never been officially admitted. He pointed to one heavily redacted document. This is from 1951, referencing a classified research facility in western Pennsylvania. The location is redacted, but the timeline matches Ridgeway's evacuation. The program's code name was Project Echo. What little we know suggests it involved memory research, specifically the transfer and storage of human memories. I felt cold. Memory transfer? That's science fiction. Dr. Liu shrugged. In 1951, it was cutting-edge neuroscience. The government was exploring everything that might give them an advantage over the Soviets. If they could reliably transfer memories between individuals, the intelligence applications would be enormous. Imagine being able to download a spy's knowledge directly into another agent's mind, or preserve the memories of dying scientists. He pulled out another document, this one a budget allocation report. Project Echo received substantial funding from 1949 to 1952. Then, abruptly, all funding ceased. The project was terminated, the research was classified beyond top secret, and the facility was dismantled. 6 months later, Ridgeway was evacuated and erased. I thought about my mother's memories she shouldn't have from when she was too young, and Maya's memories, transferred somehow across 2 generations. You think Project Echo was in Ridgeway? You think they were experimenting on the townspeople? Doctor. Liu hesitated, then nodded. I think they may have conducted unauthorized human trials, perhaps contamination of the water supply or food sources with experimental compounds designed to enhance memory retention, or maybe direct experiments on volunteers who didn't fully understand what they were agreeing to. When something went wrong, when the results were too unpredictable or too disturbing, they shut it down and buried the evidence. Literally buried it by bulldozing the entire town. He leaned back in his chair. But I can't prove any of this. The people who lived in Ridgeway are almost all dead now. Your mother might be one of the youngest survivors, and even if they wanted to talk, they were likely required to sign non-disclosure agreements as a condition of their evacuation compensation. I told him about Maya, about the drawings, and the impossibly detailed memories. Doctor. Liu listened intently, his expression shifting from skepticism to fascination to concern. If what you're describing is real, if memories are genuinely being transmitted across generations in your family, that's evidence of something far beyond what science in the 1950s should have been capable of achieving, which means either the technology was more advanced than we knew, or something went very wrong that created unintended consequences that persist to this day. He pulled out a business card and wrote a name and number on the back. This is Dr. Yolanda Reyes, a neuroscientist at Johns Hopkins who specializes in genetic memory and epigenetics. She's studied cases of trauma being passed down through generations at a cellular level. What you're describing is more extreme, but she might be interested in examining Maya. With your permission, of course. I took the card, uncertain. The idea of my daughter being studied by scientists felt wrong, but I needed answers. What should I do about the memories? Is this hurting Maya? Dr. Liu's expression was grave. I don't know. If these memories are the result of experimental contamination from the 1950s, we have no idea what the long-term effects might be. Your family might be the only documented case of this phenomenon. That makes you both incredibly valuable to researchers and potentially dangerous to people who want the past to stay buried. The warning in his voice was clear. You need to be careful who you talk to about this. If my theory about Project Echo is correct, there are people in the government who've spent 70 years keeping it secret. They won't be happy about a 6-year-old girl walking around with proof that the program existed and had lasting effects. I drove home feeling like I was being watched, though I saw no one following me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my mother as a baby being evacuated from Ridgeway, about the possibility that she'd been exposed to experimental compounds, about those compounds altering her genetic code in ways that were passed down to Maya. At 2:30 a.m., I went to check on my daughter. She was sleeping peacefully, her small face relaxed and innocent. On her nightstand was a new drawing she'd made before bed. It showed a group of men in white coats standing in what looked like a laboratory. In the background were rows of bottles and scientific equipment. At the bottom, she'd written, "The doctors gave everyone medicine to help them remember better, but Grandma Pearl said it made people forget instead." I took a photo of the drawing with my phone, my hands shaking. Maya was remembering things that happened before she was born, before her grandmother was old enough to remember consciously. She was accessing memories that had somehow been encoded into our family's genetic code, memories of secret experiments conducted on an entire town. The next morning, I called Dr. Yolanda Reyes. Her assistant scheduled an appointment for the following week, noting that the doctor was very interested in discussing genetic memory transmission. I also called my mother and told her what Dr. Liu had theorized about Project Echo. She was silent for a long moment, then said, "That would explain something my mother once told me." She said that in the months before the evacuation, everyone in Ridgeway had started having strange dreams, vivid dreams about their pasts and about things that hadn't happened yet. The town doctor had prescribed medicine to help with sleep, medicine that was distributed free to every household. My mother refused to take it because she was nursing me and didn't trust putting chemicals in her body, but almost everyone else took it. She paused. What if that medicine was part of the experiment? What if they were testing memory enhancement drugs on the entire population? The pieces were fitting together in a horrifying way. A small, isolated town, a population that trusted their local doctor, a government program desperate for results. And when the experiment went wrong, when the effects proved too unpredictable or too permanent, the solution was simple: destroy the evidence, erase the town, scatter the people, bury the truth. But they hadn't accounted for the memories persisting across generations, encoded into DNA and passed down like any other genetic trait. My mother had the memories. Maya had the memories. And somewhere, there might be other descendants of Ridgeway residents who had them too, people who'd spent their lives thinking they were crazy for remembering things they'd never experienced. I needed to find them. I spent the next several days searching online for any connection to Ridgeway. I joined genealogy forums, posted in historical society groups, and reached out to local historians in western Pennsylvania. Most people had never heard of the town, but then I got a private message from someone using the name Ridgeway Remembered. The message was brief. "My grandfather was from Ridgeway. I have his journals. We should talk." We arranged a video call for that evening. The woman who appeared on my screen was in her early 50s, with dark hair and tired eyes. She introduced herself as Catherine Novak, calling from Oregon. "My grandfather, Anton Novak, was a shopkeeper in Ridgeway," she explained. "He kept detailed journals his whole life. After he died 10 years ago, I inherited them. Most of it was mundane daily stuff, but the entries from 1951 to 1952 were different. Disturbing." She held up a leather-bound journal to the camera. "He wrote about the medicine the town doctor distributed, how it was supposed to help with mental clarity and memory enhancement. He wrote about the strange dreams that started after people began taking it, dreams so vivid they felt more real than waking life. He wrote about people claiming to remember events from before they were born, memories that belonged to their parents or grandparents." Catherine's voice grew quieter. "And he wrote about the children, the kids born in Ridgeway in 1951 and early 1952, right when the medicine was being distributed. He said those children seemed different, more aware, more knowing than children that age should be. He called them the rememberers, kids who could describe places and people they'd never seen, who spoke with the vocabulary and knowledge of adults." My throat was tight. What happened to those children? Catherine's expression was grim. "According to my grandfather, most of them were taken by the government during the evacuation. Families were separated, children removed under the pretense of medical examinations. The parents were told the children would be returned after being cleared for potential contamination. But they never came back. My grandfather estimated at least 30 children disappeared during the evacuation. No records, no graves, no acknowledgement they ever existed." I felt sick. "They took the children who showed the strongest effects of the experiment." Catherine nodded. "My grandfather spent the rest of his life trying to find out what happened to them. He contacted every government agency, wrote to every congressman. He was threatened, followed, and eventually silenced. In his final journal entry, dated 1987, he wrote that he'd been visited by federal agents who told him to stop asking questions or face consequences. He never wrote about Ridgeway again." She looked directly into the camera. "Why are you asking about this now? What's your connection to Ridgeway?" I told her about Maya, about the memories and the drawings. Catherine's eyes widened. "Your daughter is a second-generation rememberer. That means the effect is hereditary, passed down through genetic lines. My God, do you understand what that means? The experiment didn't end when they destroyed the town. It's still continuing, still affecting people 70 years later." She leaned closer to her camera. "You need to protect your daughter. If the people who ran Project Echo find out about her, they'll want to study her, or silence her. You can't trust anyone in the government. You can't trust anyone who says they want to help." but I'd already set up the appointment with Dr. Reyes at Johns Hopkins. I'd already told Dr. Liu about Maya. Had I put my daughter in danger by seeking answers? That night, I called Dr. Reyes' office to cancel the appointment. Her assistant seemed surprised and tried to reschedule, but I insisted. Then I changed my phone number. I was probably being paranoid, but Catherine's warning had terrified me. If the government had disappeared children in 1952, what would they do to protect that secret now? For a few days, nothing happened. Life continued normally. I went back to work, Maya went to school, my mother visited on the weekend. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Cars that parked too long on our street. The same sedan I saw multiple times near Maya's school. A man in a suit asking questions at the local library about families researching Ridgeway. Then, on Thursday evening, there was a knock on our door. I looked through the peephole and saw two people, a man and a woman, both in professional attire, both with serious expressions. The man held up an identification badge. "Mr. Sterling, I'm Agent David Kramer with the Department of Defense Office of Compliance. This is Dr. Susan Peltier from the National Security Medical Advisory Board. We need to speak with you about a sensitive matter concerning your daughter." My heart was pounding. I didn't open the door. "I don't have to talk to you without a lawyer present." Agent Kramer's voice remained calm. "Mr. Sterling, we're not here to cause problems. We're here because your daughter may have been exposed to information that poses a national security risk. We need to assess the situation and determine appropriate protective measures." Through the window, I saw a black SUV parked at the curb. The words, "protective measures," echoed in my mind, remembering Catherine's story about children who were taken for medical examinations and never returned. "I need you to leave my property. If you have legal grounds to be here, come back with a warrant." Dr. Peltier stepped forward. "Mr. Sterling, please understand. We're trying to help. Your daughter's condition is the result of an unfortunate historical program that was terminated decades ago. But the effects are persistent, and without proper medical intervention, they could become dangerous. We have protocols specifically designed for cases like hers." I pulled out my phone and called 911. "There are two people claiming to be federal agents at my door refusing to leave. I feel threatened." The dispatcher asked for my address and said officers were being dispatched. Agent Kramer heard my conversation through the door. "Mr. Sterling, involving local law enforcement will only complicate matters. This is a federal issue beyond their jurisdiction." I didn't respond. I went to Maya's room, where she was playing with dolls, oblivious to what was happening. My mother was there too, having stayed for dinner. I told her quickly about the people at the door. Her face went pale. "They found us. Just like they found the families in 1952. We need to leave." But where would we go? And for how long? I couldn't uproot Maya's life because I was paranoid about something that might not even be a real threat. The police arrived within 10 minutes. I watched through the window as two officers talked to Agent Kramer and Dr. Peltier. The agents showed identification, and the conversation seemed cordial, but tense. After a few minutes, one of the officers came to my door. I opened it slightly, keeping the chain lock engaged. "Mr. Sterling, these folks say they're from the Department of Defense and need to talk to you about a family matter. Is everything okay?" I told the officer I didn't want to speak with them, that I felt they were harassing me. The officer looked uncomfortable. "Sir, they're saying this is a matter of national security. I can ask them to leave, but if they have legitimate federal business, they can come back with proper documentation." Agent Kramer called out from the driveway. "Officer, we don't want to cause a disturbance. Mr. Sterling, we'll leave for now, but we will need to speak with you soon. This isn't going away." They left, and the police officers took my statement, noting the incident in their report. After they left, I locked every door and window and sat with my mother and Maya, trying to figure out what to do. My mother's hands were shaking. "They're going to take her, just like they took the other children. We can't let that happen." I called Catherine Novak in Oregon and told her what had happened. She wasn't surprised. "They must have been monitoring your communications. When you started researching Ridgeway, making connections, talking to historians, you triggered their surveillance systems. They know about Maya now, and they'll keep coming until they get what they want." She paused. "There's only one way to protect her. You need to go public. Make the story so visible, so documented, so widely known that they can't make her disappear without massive scrutiny. You need journalists, lawyers, public attention. It's the only shield that might work." But how? I was a single father in suburban Ohio with no media connections, no platform, no credibility. Who would believe a story about a secret government program from the 1950s that created genetic memory transfer? Catherine had an answer. "There's a journalist named Isabel Tran at the Washington Post who specializes in government cover-ups and classified programs. She broke the story on the Army's LSD experiments in the 1990s. I've been in contact with her for years, feeding her information about Ridgeway when I found it. She's been waiting for proof, something concrete she could publish. Your daughter might be that proof." She gave me Isabel Tran's contact information. "Call her tonight. Tell her everything. Send her Maya's drawings and any documentation you have. If she thinks the story is solid, she can have it published within days. Once it's out there, the government loses the power to silence you quietly." I spent the next hour writing down everything. Maya's memories, the drawings, my mother's story, Dr. Liu's theories about Project Echo, Catherine's grandfather's journals, the visit from the federal agents. I scanned Maya's drawings and gathered every piece of evidence I could find. Then I called Isabel Tran. She answered on the third ring, her voice professional and guarded. I introduced myself and said I had information about a classified government program from the 1950s that had lasting effects, continuing to this day. There was a pause. Catherine Novak told me you might call. What do you have? I spent 45 minutes explaining everything. Isabel listened without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Mr. Sterling, if what you're telling me is true, this is one of the biggest stories of government malfeasance in American history. An entire town erased to cover up unauthorized human experimentation, effects that persist across generations, children who were disappeared and never accounted for. But I need hard evidence. Memories and drawings aren't enough. I need documents, photographs, corroborating witnesses. I told her about Dr. Liu's research and Catherine's grandfather's journals. Isabel made notes. I'll contact them both. I'll also file new FOIA requests for Project Echo and Ridgeway evacuation records. If the government denies or heavily redacts them, that's part of the story. And I want to interview your mother and daughter on the record. My protective instincts flared. My daughter is 6 years old. I don't want her exposed to media attention. Isabel's voice softened. I understand. But Mr. Sterling, she's already exposed. The government knows about her. Your only protection now is sunlight, making sure so many people know her story that she can't vanish quietly. I'll be respectful, age-appropriate, and I'll let you review anything I write about her before publication. But I need her voice, her drawings, her memories. That's the proof that makes this real. I looked at Maya, who was drawing again, creating another scene from Ridgeway. A park with children playing, families having picnics, normal small-town life from 70 years ago. How could I ask her to be the face of a story that would change her life forever? But how could I not, if it was the only way to keep her safe? I need to think about it. Can I call you back tomorrow? Isabel agreed. But Mr. Sterling, think quickly. If those federal agents come back with legal authority, you won't have a choice. Right now, you still do. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. The government could discredit us, claim Maya's memories were fabricated or coached. They could argue national security and seal all records indefinitely. They could destroy my reputation, make me look like a conspiracy theorist exploiting his daughter for attention. Or they could simply take Maya, and I'd spend the rest of my life fighting a system designed to protect its secrets. By morning, I'd made my decision. I called Isabel Tran. We'll do the interview, but we do it on my terms, in my home, with my lawyer present, and I see everything before it's published. Isabel agreed immediately. She flew to Ohio that same day, bringing a photographer and a recording technician. I'd hired a lawyer, Gary Finch, who specialized in whistleblower protection and First Amendment cases. He reviewed the interview questions and sat in during the entire process. Maya was nervous at first, shy around strangers with cameras. But Isabel had a gentle way with children, asking simple questions and letting Maya answer at her own pace. She asked about the drawings, about the people and places Maya remembered. Maya described Ridgeway in detail, the sound of the church bells on Sunday mornings, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery, the feeling of holding Grandma Pearl's hand while walking to the library. Then Isabel asked the crucial question. Maya, do you know how you remember these things? These places and people from before you were born? Maya thought for a moment, her 6-year-old face serious. They're in my head, like dreams, but realer. Grandma Pearl is there, and she shows me things. Not my grandma who visits, but a different Grandma Pearl who lived in Ridgeway. She's in my memories, even though I never met her. She looked at me. Daddy, is that okay? Is it bad that I remember things that aren't mine? I knelt beside her chair. No, sweetheart, it's not bad. It's special. And it's important that you tell people about what you remember, because it's part of history that was forgotten. Isabel interviewed my mother next, documenting her memories of Ridgeway and her own mother, Pearl Whitmore. My mother described the evacuation, the fear and confusion, families being split up and sent to different cities with no forwarding addresses. She showed photographs she'd kept from her mother's belongings, a few precious images of Ridgeway before it was destroyed. Isabel photographed everything, Maya's drawings, my mother's photos, the timeline I'd created connecting Project Echo to the town's erasure. She interviewed Dr. Liu by phone and secured permission to quote from his research. She contacted Catherine Novak and arranged to review Anton Novak's journals. Within a week, she had a comprehensive story. She sent me the draft for review. It was powerful, detailed, and damning. Secret government program erased entire town to cover up memory experiments, descendants still affected 70 years later. The article laid out everything. The existence of Project Echo, the unauthorized experiments on Ridgeway residents, the evacuation and erasure of the town, the children who disappeared, and the genetic legacy that continued in Maya and others. It named names where possible and called for a full investigation and declassification of all related documents. I approved it with minor changes, and Isabel submitted it to the Washington Post. The editors fact-checked everything, consulted with lawyers, and confirmed it met their publication standards. 3 days later, on a Sunday morning, the story ran on the front page of the Post's website and in the print edition. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the story was being shared across social media. News organizations requested interviews. Congressional representatives called for investigations. Other descendants of Ridgeway residents came forward with their own stories of inherited memories and family mysteries they'd never understood. The Department of Defense issued a terse statement. The allegations in the Washington Post article are being reviewed. We cannot comment on classified programs or operations from the historical period in question. The safety and privacy of all American citizens is our top priority. Which was bureaucratic speak for, we're not denying it, but we're not confirming it either. Agent Kramer and Dr. Peltier did not return to my house. Instead, I received a call from a different official, a woman named Deputy Director Lee Morrison from the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General. She apologized for the earlier miscommunication and said her office was opening an independent investigation into Project Echo and the Ridgeway incident. She wanted to interview Maya and my mother as part of the official record. Gary Finch negotiated the terms. The interviews would be voluntary, conducted in our home with legal representation present, and full transcripts would be provided to us. The DOD would not make any medical claims about Maya or attempt any interventions without our explicit written consent. Over the next several months, the story continued to unfold. The government released heavily redacted documents about Project Echo, confirming that a memory research program had existed from 1949 to 1952 in western Pennsylvania. They acknowledged that the program had been terminated due to unforeseen complications, and that the research facility had been dismantled. They did not acknowledge unauthorized human experimentation or the disappearance of children. But other evidence emerged. A researcher going through declassified CIA files found references to Project Echo subjects and juvenile retention anomalies. Medical records from a long-closed veterans hospital showed treatment of former Ridgeway residents for persistent memory intrusions in the 1960s and 1970s. And Catherine Novak, working with the National Archives, uncovered a classified memo from 1952 discussing the containment protocol for children showing excessive retention patterns. The memo recommended isolation and observation, but didn't specify where these children were taken or what happened to them. A congressional committee was formed to investigate. Hearings were held. My mother testified about her experiences. Dr. Liu presented his research. Isabel Tran detailed her investigative findings. And Maya, my 6-year-old daughter, sat in a congressional hearing room and drew pictures of Ridgeway, while experts discussed genetic memory transfer and government accountability. The committee's final report, released 18 months after the story broke, concluded that Project Echo had indeed conducted unauthorized human experimentation on Ridgeway residents, that the evacuation and erasure of the town was a cover-up, and that at least 34 children had been removed from their families and placed in undisclosed government facilities for observation. The report recommended compensation for descendants of Ridgeway residents, declassification of all Project Echo documents, and a formal apology from the Department of Defense. The government issued the apology. Some documents were declassified, though many remained sealed under national security exemptions. A compensation fund was established, though the amounts offered were modest compared to the harm done. The children who disappeared were never found, and their fates remained unknown. But the truth was out there now, acknowledged and documented. Ridgeway was no longer erased. It existed in the historical record, in congressional testimony, in newspaper archives, in the memories of descendants who carried the town's legacy in their genes. Maya is 9 now, 3 years after this all began. She still has the memories of Ridgeway, but they've faded somewhat as her own experiences have accumulated. She understands what happened, why she remembers things she never experienced, and why our family was at the center of a story that changed how America understood its own history. She's been in therapy to help process the media attention and the weight of being a living witness to secret history. She's doing well, all things considered. My mother passed away last year at 75. In her final days, she talked about Ridgeway, about her mother Pearl, about the town that was stolen from her before she was old enough to consciously remember it. She died knowing that the truth had been told, that the people of Ridgeway were no longer forgotten. Catherine Novak published her grandfather's journals, and they're now part of the permanent collection at the Smithsonian. Dr. Liu's research became the basis for a book about Cold War-era government programs and displaced communities. Isabel Tran won a Pulitzer Prize for her investigative reporting. As for me, I'm still just a father trying to protect his daughter. But I learned that sometimes protection doesn't mean hiding. Sometimes it means exposing the truth so completely that no one can bury it again. Sometimes the only way to keep someone safe is to make sure the whole world is watching. Maya's teacher was right to ask why my child remembered events from a town erased in 1952. The answer turned out to be more complicated and more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. But at least now, we have answers. And Ridgeway, the town that was supposed to never exist, lives on in the memories of those who carry its story forward, whether they remember it consciously or not. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.